Welcome. I'm just so glad you could join us for this deep dive today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a really important one.
It really is. And I want to start by asking you, the listener, to just step back in time with me for a minute. Picture a very specific scene.
Hmm.
The date is December 6th, 1991. You are in Austin, Texas. It's a Friday night. The weather is, just starting to get that crisp winter chill.
Like that classic December feel.
Exactly. And the city has that distinct, sort of laid back college town energy that Austin is so famous for. But specifically, I want you to visualize a completely mundane, innocent location.
Like a place we've all been 100 times.
Yes, exactly. It's a local franchise shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt.
It's the exact kind of place that exists in the background of, well, almost everyone's youth.
I mean, think about it. The brightly lit pastel interior, the hum of those big commercial refrigeration units, the smell of waffle cones baking.
And probably some soft pop music playing in the overhead speakers.
Yeah, exactly. It's a space designed entirely around comfort and routine. It is literally the absolute last place on earth you would ever associate with a nightmare.
But that's exactly what it became.
It did. On that Friday night, that brightly lit shop became the site of one of America's most disturbing, heartbreaking, and frankly, controversial unsolved crimes.
It really shook the whole city to its core.
It shattered them. So today, our mission is to explore the 1991 Austin yogurt shop murders. We are going to examine a case that started as this unimaginable local tragedy and then evolved or devolved really into a decades-long pursuit of justice.
A very messy pursuit.
Incredibly messy. We are talking about a labyrinth of a story, coerced confessions, overturned convictions, the really heavy shadow of unknown killers, and a desperate search for answers that is actually still continuing today.
What's fascinating here is how this specific case operates as a masterclass in forensic history.
How so?
Well, when we analyze a crime from 1991, we really have to recalibrate our expectations of what police could actually do back then.
Right, because we're so used to modern CSI stuff now.
Exactly. We are looking at an era where DNA technology was in its absolute infancy. The microscopic genetic tracing that we see, resolving cold cases almost every week in the modern era.
Yeah.
It simply did not exist to these investigators.
That's wild to think about.
It is. Because of that technological bottleneck, the investigation was forced down paths that would take literally decades to untangle. It is a profound study in the friction between a terrified public demanding immediate answers, police desperation, and the very slow, methodical march of scientific advancement.
And that friction, that exact friction you just mentioned, is exactly why you need to care about this story. We are not just piecing together a timeline of a horrific night here. We are looking at a stark, sobering reminder of how quickly a perfectly normal evening can just shatter.
In the blink of an eye.
Right, we are examining how the justice system itself, fueled by this intense and very human desperation to find answers for a grieving community, can stumble in the dark.
And destroy more lives in the process.
Exactly. It's a story about the devastating human cost of a flawed investigation and the terrifying reality that sometimes the worst among us manage to slip away into the night completely undetected.
Leaving nothing but questions.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting where we absolutely have to start, with the victims. Because behind the sensational headlines, behind the eventual court battles and the DNA science, 4 teenage girls lost their lives.
We have to understand who they were to even begin to comprehend the magnitude of this loss.
We do.
The human element anchors everything that follows in this case. When we look at the victimology, the profile of the people targeted, we see 4 young girls whose presence at that yogurt shop was a mix of routine teenage employment and just tragic, everyday coincidence.
Let's introduce them. First, there was Eliza Thomas. She was 17 years old.
It's a high school kid.
Just a kid. She was an employee at the shop, and that Friday night, she was assigned to work the closing shift. Reading through the background materials, her friends described her as a deeply creative soul.
Someone known for her love of art and music, right?
Yes, exactly. She was just a normal high schooler, making some spending money at a part-time job. And working right alongside her, behind the counter for that closing shift, was Jennifer Harbison.
Who was also 17.
Also 17, yes.
And Jennifer's presence introduces the most heartbreaking overlap of the entire evening.
It really does, because her younger sister, Sarah Harbison, was also at the shop.
Right. And Sarah was only 15 years old.
So young.
She was actually a part-time employee at that very same yogurt shop herself. And she was highly regarded by the management as a hardworking, responsible kid. But crucially, and this is the heartbreaking part, Sarah wasn't on the clock that night.
She wasn't working.
No, she was just visiting the shop. She was hanging out in the customer area while her older sister finished up her shift.
I really want you to think about that dynamic for a second, because it is something so many of us have done. You know, you don't have a cell phone to scroll on in 1991.
No, you're just existing in the space.
Right. You just go to the local food spot where your sibling or your friend works, you slide into a booth, and you wait. You wait for them to wipe down the counters, lock the doors, so you can all go do something fun on a Friday night.
It's a universal teenage experience.
It really is. And rounding out this group of four was Amy Ayers.
Amy was the youngest of all of them.
She was. She was just 13 years old. The records describe her as incredibly cheerful and friendly. And just like Sarah, Amy was only there to visit.
She was Sarah's friend.
Right. The two of them were simply at the shop to hang out and wait for closing time. So you have this picture. Two girls doing their jobs, counting the register, cleaning the yogurt machines, and two girls just hanging out, probably talking about school, music, or their weekend plans.
That specific innocent profile is what triggered such a massive psychological shockwave through the city of Austin.
It's every parent's worst nightmare.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture of how communities process trauma, victimology dictates the temperature of the public reaction. You have four young, entirely innocent teenagers. They were in a brightly lit commercial environment in a safe area of the city.
They were doing everything right.
Exactly. They were either working a legitimate job or socializing in a safe public space. When extreme, calculated violence penetrates a space that society has universally deemed safe, the public shock is immediate.
It shatters the illusion of security.
Completely shatters it. The community feels a collective trauma, which instantly converts into immense, crushing pressure on the police department to solve the crime and put the monster behind bars yesterday.
Yeah, put yourself in the shoes of a parent in Austin in December 1991. If you're eating frozen yogurt at 10 p.m. on a Friday, where are they safe?
Nowhere feels safe anymore.
Exactly. That contrast between the extreme innocence of the setting and the extreme darkness of the crime is what makes this case so notoriously chilling. To understand how that shift happened, we have to look closely at the timeline of that night.
The timeline is critical.
It is. The police reports give us a very specific sequence of events, or at least the framework of a sequence, as best as they could reconstruct it from the ashes.
The timeline begins with the mundane routine of retail closure. As the evening progressed toward 10 p.m., which was the scheduled closing time for the shop, everything appeared completely normal.
Just a regular Friday night.
Right. However, there is a subtle but critical detail noted in the initial witness reports from the surrounding area.
The people outside.
Yes, people in the vicinity, customers of neighboring businesses, people driving by. They later told police that they had observed suspicious young men roaming the strip mall area around the shop earlier in the night.
Which is one of those agonizing details that only takes on a sinister weight in hindsight, you know? At 9:30 p.m., seeing a few guys loitering outside a strip mall doesn't trigger alarm bells.
No, it just looks like teenagers killing time.
Right, exactly. But then we hit the critical hour. It's past 10 p.m., the doors are supposed to be locked, and the breach happens.
Multiple attackers managed to enter the shop.
Yes. And initially, the crime presents as a standard financially motivated robbery. The attackers go for the cash register. But here is the detail that absolutely stops you in your tracks. The police confirmed they took less than $500.
Less than $500.
Less than $500. And what happens next is a horrifying, violent escalation. At gunpoint, these attackers assert physical control over all four girls: Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy.
And they forced them out of the brightly lit front area.
Yes, away from the windows and into the back storage room of the shop.
That physical movement from the front of the store to the back is the single most critical juncture in understanding the psychology of the perpetrators here.
Why is that movement so important?
Well, in behavioral analysis, an armed robbery of a retail store for less than $500 is a common, high-speed crime. The perpetrators operate on pure adrenaline.
They just want the money.
Right. They want to get in, secure the cash, and get out before the police can be called. But moving the victims to a secondary location, even if that location is just a storage room 30 feet away, represents a massive, terrifying shift in intent.
The goal isn't just the register anymore.
Exactly. The goal is no longer property acquisition. The goal is now control, detention, and isolation. They are deliberately removing the girls from the sightline of the large glass windows facing the street.
And the violence that unfolds in that back room is just horrific to even articulate. The investigators determined that some of the victims were sexually assaulted, and subsequently, all four of these young girls were shot in the head, execution style.
Using a .22 caliber gun.
It is an escalation that defies any rational understanding. To go from a petty cash robbery to the sexual assault, and then to the execution of four teenagers who posed literally no physical threat to them.
The psychological leap from a petty thief to a mass murderer is staggering. It requires a level of ruthlessness, sadism, and emotional detachment that is deeply alarming to anyone studying criminal behavior.
It's purely evil.
It is. But the sequence of events doesn't end with the discharge of the weapon. The actions taken after the murders speak volumes about the profile of the killers.
Right, because they didn't just run away.
No, they did not flee into the night in a state of panic, which is exactly what you would expect from inexperienced criminals who just crossed the line into homicide. Instead, they engaged in a highly deliberate, methodical cover-up.
What exactly did they do?
They physically moved the victims again. They deliberately stacked their bodies on top of each other, and then they intentionally set the yogurt shop on fire. The clear, calculated purpose of this arson was the total destruction of physical evidence.
I was reading through the crime scene notes, and there's a detail that really disturbed me. The reports say the victims were actually lined up before the executions, and then, as you mentioned, their bodies were deliberately stacked on top of one another.
Yes.
Expert, from a behavioral analysis standpoint, what on earth are we looking at here? Because that does not sound like a chaotic, panicked robbery gone wrong.
Not at all. When investigators see victims who have been arranged, lined up, and then deliberately stacked post-mortem, they are looking at an environment of absolute, chilling control.
Control.
Yes, the perpetrators were operating completely outside the realm of a chaotic frenzy. Think about the physical mechanics of what you're describing. A panicked criminal who fires a weapon out of fear or a sudden loss of control experiences a massive adrenaline dump.
Right, fight or flight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That adrenaline essentially forces them to flee the environment immediately. But these individuals stayed. They took the time to organize a gruesome scene. They expended the physical energy required to maneuver lifeless bodies.
That's horrifying.
It is. And then they took the time to procure accelerants and systematically deploy them to start a structural fire. It suggests a mindset that is disturbingly calm, methodical, and highly organized. They felt they owned that environment completely.
That really forces you to ponder the timeline of that night. I mean, how much time did these killers actually spend inside the shop after closing?
It had to be a significant amount.
Right. To breach the store, commit the robbery, force the girls to the back, commit the assaults, carry out 4 separate executions, and then meticulously arrange the scene and set a fire. That takes time.
A lot of time.
The nature of this cover-up tells us the killers felt totally secure. They felt like they had all the time in the world to execute this horrific plan without the immediate threat of a police cruiser pulling into the parking lot.
And that's highly unusual. The amount of time spent on a crime scene increases the risk of apprehension exponentially with every passing minute.
Especially in a commercial area with glass windows.
Exactly. The fact that they were willing to linger in a retail shop with large glass windows facing a public street even after hours shows either an astronomical degree of overconfidence or a severe lack of situational awareness.
Which do you think it was?
Well, given the highly methodical nature of the forensic countermeasures to fire, the stacking it strongly point to the former. They were overconfident. They were absolutely confident they would not be interrupted.
And that deliberate cover-up leads us to the morning of December 7th, 1991. I want you to imagine being a first responder waking up that morning.
It would be unimaginable.
Firefighters get a dispatch call about a commercial building fire at a strip mall. They rush to the scene, they deploy their hoses, they battle the blaze, and they eventually extinguish the flames.
Just doing their job.
Right. Then they have to enter the heavily damaged smoking structure to assess the hot spots and the structural integrity. It is in that dark, waterlogged back room amidst the smoke and the ash that they make the gruesome discovery.
4 bodies.
4 charred bodies.
Hmm.
That is how the city of Austin woke up on December 7th. The innocence of that community was completely shattered, replaced by a crime scene that would baffle and frustrate investigators for decades.
Once the fire was fully extinguished and the area was secured, the enormous, heartbreaking task of the police investigation officially began. But from the very first hour, detectives were facing an uphill battle of unprecedented proportions.
Because of the fire.
Yes. Fire, by its very nature, is incredibly destructive to forensic evidence. It consumes hair, fibers, and biological trace
It
material.
just eats everything.
Exactly. Furthermore, the immense volume of water used by the firefighters to extinguish the blaze washes away blood spatter patterns, dilutes bodily fluids, and completely compromises delicate evidence like fingerprints on doors or counters.
And the killers knew that.
They absolutely did. They knew exactly what they were doing when they sparked that blaze. They were attempting to erase their existence from that room.
But looking at the early case files, the police didn't walk away completely empty-handed from the ashes, right? They did find some early clues amidst the wreckage that gave them a starting point.
Yes, they did. Despite the severe devastation caused by the fire and the water, the crime scene investigators were able to recover certain foundational pieces of physical evidence.
Like what?
Most notably, they recovered the .22 caliber bullets that had been used in the executions.
Okay, so they have the murder weapon's caliber.
Right. Knowing the murder weapon's caliber is a crucial, undeniable starting point for any homicide investigation. They also had the witness reports we discussed earlier.
The guy's lingering in the parking lot.
Yes, the sightings of teenage or young adult men loitering in the vicinity of the shop around the time of the murders. Furthermore, they did manage to recover some biological material that indicated sexual assault had taken place.
That feels like it should be a huge break.
It should be. But here is the critical bottleneck that defines this entire tragedy. The year was 1991.
So what does a DNA investigation actually look like in 1991 compared to what we see on TV today?
The contrast is night and day. In the early 90s, DNA technology was severely limited.
How limited are we talking?
Very. The processes used back then, like RFLP testing, required a very large, highly pristine sample of biological material. Think a pool of blood or a very large, uncontaminated semen sample.
Not just a microscopic trace.
Right. The highly sensitive, incredibly precise microscopic tools we have today, which can pull a complete genetic profile from a dozen skin cells left on a doorknob. They simply did not exist.
Wow.
And because the evidence at the yogurt shop had been subjected to extreme heat, smoke, and thousands of gallons of water, it was highly degraded.
So they couldn't test it.
Initial testing of the available evidence yielded very little actionable progress.
It is incredibly frustrating to think about. I mean, you put yourself in the shoes of those detectives. They have this horrific crime scene. They know the sequence of events. They have witness descriptions of young men. They even have the bullets and some biological trace.
They have all the puzzle pieces, but they don't fit together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ultimate key to unlocking the identity of the killers is trapped behind this wall of technological limitations. So, what happens to the case?
It stalls.
It stalls. And it doesn't just stall for a few months while they wait for a lab result. It stalls for 8 long years. And this is where the narrative of this deep dive takes a massive, highly controversial turn. Let's look at the investigation, the false starts, and the coerced confessions.
The timeline gap between the crime in December 1991 and the next major movement in the case is profound. 8 years is an eternity in an active homicide investigation.
Can't even imagine what the families were going through.
Right. During those 8 years, you have the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy pleading daily for justice. You have a community that remains deeply unsettled, literally jumping at shadows.
Because the killers are just out there.
Exactly. And you have a police department carrying the immense, crushing weight of an unsolved quadruple homicide of local children. That specific environment breeds a unique kind of systemic desperation.
Desperation to just close the case.
Yes. And then finally, in 1999, the police announced a massive break in the case. They announced the arrest of 4 suspects.
I can only imagine the collective sigh of relief that must have washed over the city of Austin when that news broke on the evening broadcasts. 8 years later, they finally have people in handcuffs.
It felt like the end of the nightmare.
But it wasn't. The 4 individuals arrested were Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, Forrest Wellborn, and Maurice Pierce. And looking at the case files, there's a very important detail here. All 4 of these individuals were teenagers themselves back in 1991 when the crime was committed.
Yes, they were young.
But the bedrock of the police department's case against them wasn't some sudden leap in forensic science. They didn't suddenly match a fingerprint to the counter.
No, they didn't.
The entire foundation of the arrests was confessions. The police claim that these suspects had explicitly confessed to the murders.
Within the justice system, confessions are historically considered the gold standard of evidence by juries.
People trust them.
They do. When an individual sits in a room and admits to committing a heinous crime, it provides a very neat, comprehensible narrative for the prosecution to present in court. Juries naturally want to believe that innocent people do not confess to crimes they didn't commit.
Makes sense on the surface.
Right. However, the situation with these four young men was anything but neat, tidy narrative. It quickly emerged that the interrogations leading to these confessions were highly aggressive and deeply problematic.
How so?
Well, the suspects did not offer a single cohesive timeline of the night. Instead, they constantly changed their stories during hours of questioning.
They couldn't get their story straight.
Exactly. Even more damning, the confessions they eventually signed blatantly contradicted one another regarding fundamental basic details of the crime.
What kind of details?
Things like how they entered the shop, who held the weapon, who did what to whom, and how the fire was started. They couldn't agree on the basic facts of what supposedly happened.
Here's where it gets really interesting and a bit terrifying for anyone who assumes the justice system is infallible. Let's really dig into this, because the concept of a false confession is incredibly hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around.
It is very counterintuitive.
Right. If you are listening to this right now, your immediate thought is probably, I would never, ever confess to a quadruple murder I didn't commit. You could lock me in a room for a week, and I wouldn't say I killed 4 kids.
That's the normal reaction.
Especially not 4 different people independently confessing to the exact same crime. How does a police interrogation extract statements from multiple teenagers that are ultimately entirely unreliable?
It is deeply rooted in human psychology and the mechanics of highly structured interrogation techniques. When you take a teenager or young adult, isolate them in a small, windowless room for hours or even days, and subject them to relentless, aggressive questioning by authority figures,
You break them down.
you systematically break down their psychological defenses.
Yes.
Interrogators in these high-pressure scenarios often use tactics that imply they already have absolute, undeniable proof of the suspect's guilt.
Even if they don't have anything.
Exactly. They might claim they have fingerprints or witnesses, even if they don't. And crucially, they suggest that confessing is the only possible way to avoid the harshest punishment available,
Which in Texas is.
the death penalty.
Wow. Put yourself in that interrogation room. You are young, you are exhausted, you are terrified, and a detective is screaming at you that you are going to be put to death unless you tell them what they want to hear.
The confession essentially becomes a survival mechanism, right?
Precisely. It transitions from a search for truth to an exercise in compliance.
Compliance.
Yes. The psychological pressure becomes so unbearable that the immediate goal of the suspect shifts from telling the truth to simply making the interrogation stop. They reach a point of profound exhaustion where they begin to agree with the leading questions provided by the detective.
And that's how the story gets built. And this is where the contamination happens. The detectives, suffering from extreme tunnel vision and desperate to close a case that has haunted them for 8 years, might inadvertently feed specific details of the crime scene to the suspect during the questioning.
Like, did you use a .22 caliber?
Yes. And the exhausted suspect just nods and says yes. This is exactly why you end up with contradictory statements among multiple suspects. They aren't recounting a shared memory of a horrific event they participated in together.
They're just guessing.
They are independently trying to guess what the police want to hear in order to survive the room. The fact that the records explicitly note these suspects constantly changed their stories and contradicted each other is a massive, glaring red flag for false confessions.
But despite those massive red flags waving in the wind, the momentum of the justice system was just too strong to stop.
The train had left the station.
It had. The public wanted a conviction, the prosecutors had signed confessions, and the trials moved forward. In 2001, Robert Springsteen went to trial and was convicted by a jury. He was sentenced to life in prison.
And then the next year.
Right, the very next year, in 2002, Michael Scott faced a jury and was also convicted. For all intents and purposes, the books were being closed on the Austin yogurt shop murders.
The city breathed a sigh of relief.
They thought the monsters were finally behind bars. But the truth was a ticking time bomb buried in the evidence locker. And it took until 2009 for it to finally explode.
The year 2009 marks the absolute unraveling of the state's entire narrative.
What happened?
Appellate courts meticulously reviewed the convictions of Springsteen and Scott and fundamentally dismantled them. The convictions were outright canceled.
Just canceled.
The higher courts recognized what behavioral scientists and defense attorneys have been screaming about for years. The confessions were inherently unreliable, obtained through coercive, constitutionally problematic means.
And what about the physical evidence?
The actual physical evidence tying these specific young men to the crime scene was incredibly weak to virtually non-existent. The state could not support the convictions without those tainted confessions, and ultimately the charges against all four men were completely dismissed.
I want you to pause and really absorb the double tragedy that unfolds here. First, think about the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy. For nearly a decade, they believed they had finally achieved some measure of justice.
They had sat through those trials.
Yes, they had endured the agonizing process of sitting through trials, listening to graphic testimony about their daughter's final moments, and watching men be sentenced to life in prison. To have that closure violently ripped away.
To be back at square one.
To be told by a judge that the people in prison are actually not the killers and that the real perpetrators are still out there walking the streets, it is a psychological devastation that is almost impossible to fathom.
And the second layer of this tragedy belongs to the falsely accused.
Absolutely.
You have young men who spent years of their lives, formative, crucial years of early adulthood, locked inside maximum security penitentiaries for a horrific quadruple homicide they had absolutely nothing to do with.
Their youth was stolen?
Their lives were entirely derailed, their reputations permanently destroyed, and their freedom stolen based on psychological coercion and systemic tunnel vision. The failure of the investigation here impacted dozens of lives across multiple families, creating a massive ripple effect of trauma.
So what does this all mean for the actual search for the real killers? It means the detectives are back to square one, but with a massive, game-changing twist.
The DNA.
The exact same science that helped cast doubt on the state's case and exonerate the falsely accused is the science that eventually provides the most tantalizing yet deeply frustrating clue in the entire history of the investigation. Let's talk about the DNA revelation.
This development is the turning point that shifts the entire paradigm of the Austin yogurt shop murders. By the late 2000s, DNA technology had advanced light years beyond what was possible in 1991 or even 1999.
They didn't need the massive samples anymore.
Exactly. Scientists no longer needed large, pristine samples. Investigators were able to take the preserved biological evidence from the crime scene specifically, evidence that had survived the extreme heat of the fire and the deluge of water from the fire hoses, and apply new, highly sensitive extraction and amplification techniques.
And what did they find?
Through this advanced microscopic process, they successfully isolated a specific genetic profile. The investigative records identify it definitively as an unknown male DNA profile found on one of the victims, explicitly linked to the sexual assault.
And here is the absolute gut punch for the original investigators. They take this newly discovered unknown male DNA profile and they run it against the four suspects they had arrested back in 1999: Scott, Springsteen, Wellborn, and Pierce.
And the result was definitive.
A definitive, undeniable exclusion. The unknown male DNA did not match a single one of the four suspects.
This scientific reality is what definitively shattered any lingering belief in the state's original theory of the crime. DNA is unambiguous in this specific context.
It doesn't lie.
No. If the biological material left by the perpetrator during the commission of the sexual assault does not match the men sitting in prison, then the men in prison are not the perpetrators of that assault.
It's that simple.
It is. The implication is as chilling as it is absolute. The real killer, or killers, is still out there. They executed 4 young girls, set a commercial building on fire, and completely vanished into the ether without leaving a trace in any criminal database.
So what does this all mean? This single microscopic drop of DNA essentially dismantled over a decade of exhaustive police work, nullified 2 murder convictions, and reset the clock to 0.
It completely wiped the board clean.
It is incredible how something invisible to the naked eye carries such monumental, undeniable weight in the justice system. But having an unknown profile is only half the battle. You need someone to match it to.
And they don't have a match.
Right. Since they don't have a match in CODIS or any criminal database, investigators are left staring at a blank wall, forced to reconsider every single theory about what actually happened that night. Looking at the case files, there are 3 main theories that have been fiercely debated by law enforcement and criminologists for decades. Let's look at the first one: a random robbery gone wrong.
The robbery gone wrong scenario is often the default theory in commercial retail homicides. The basic premise is that the attackers entered the yogurt shop simply intending to steal the cash from the register.
Like a crime of opportunity.
Yes. However, in this scenario, something goes terribly wrong. Perhaps one of the victims resists, perhaps an attacker panics, or perhaps they suddenly realize that the girls can identify them because they aren't wearing masks. In this scenario, the attackers eliminate the witnesses out of sheer panic and desperation.
But wait, if we look back at our earlier discussion, doesn't the behavioral evidence completely contradict that idea?
It does.
I mean, if it's a random robbery where some amateur thief panics and pulls a trigger, they don't take the time to methodically line people up, stack their bodies, and systematically set a structural fire to cover their tracks.
This raises an important question regarding criminal psychology. Why would a panicked, adrenaline-fueled thief go to such methodical lengths to destroy evidence?
They wouldn't?
No, they wouldn't. The behavioral signature of the crime scene, the calmness required to stack bodies, the organization needed to procure accelerants, the deliberation of the arson is fundamentally at odds with the robbery gone wrong theory. The sheer amount of time they spent in the shop post-murders strongly suggests they were not acting out of a sudden, chaotic panic. They were acting with lethal intent and a clear plan for forensic evasion.
Which naturally brings us to the second theory mentioned in the files: multiple attackers. The evidence, according to the investigators' analysis, suggests there was likely a group of 3 to 4 attackers involved in the breach. Why is that the prevailing thought among experts? Why couldn't this be the work of one incredibly violent...
Or autonomous individuals simultaneously is an incredibly complex task.
It's basically impossible for one person.
Moving them from the brightly lit front of the store to a back room and keeping them completely subdued while committing sexual assault and execution-style murders would be incredibly difficult, if not entirely impossible, for a lone individual. Even armed with a firearm, a single attacker faces a high statistical risk of one or more victims fighting back, screaming for help, or attempting to flee through a back door.
But with 3 or 4 guys...
The presence of 3 to 4 attackers allows for a clear division of labor. Some individuals maintain perimeter control and watch the windows, some manage and subdue the victims, and some execute the cover-up and the arson. It aligns much more closely with the reality of how the crime was successfully carried out without immediate disruption or escape.
Okay, so if we assume it's a group of 3 to 4 people coordinating this nightmare, that feeds directly into the third and perhaps most terrifying theory: organized local criminals.
The most plausible theory.
The investigators strongly suspect that because of the deliberate snacking of the bodies and the calculated use of arson to destroy evidence, these weren't just random kids off the street looking for a thrill. These were individuals who knew exactly what they were doing and how police investigate crimes.
The organized local criminals theory holds the most weight when you analyze the totality of the circumstances and the forensic countermeasures deployed. The perpetrators demonstrated a rudimentary yet highly effective understanding of crime scene investigation.
They knew about trace evidence.
They knew fire would destroy trace evidence, hair, and fibers. They knew the fire department's response would compromise the rest of the scene with water. Furthermore, the fact that they managed to completely evade the massive multi-agency dragnet that descended upon Austin following the murders suggests 2 possibilities.
What are those?
They either had deep ties to the community that allowed them to blend back in seamlessly, or they had the resources and foresight to leave the area entirely before the borders were squeezed. But the most staggering aspect of this theory is the silence.
What do you mean by the silence?
If there were 3 or 4 individuals involved in a crime of this magnitude, the fact that none of them have confessed, bragged to a girlfriend, gotten drunk and slipped up, or turned on each other for a plea deal in over 30 years is statistically highly unusual.
Someone usually talks.
Usually, yes. Criminal conspiracies, especially violent ones involving multiple people, usually fracture over time. The silence implies a tight-knit group bound by extreme loyalty, a shared history of violence, or profound mutual fear.
It is genuinely haunting to think about. Imagine a group of people committing an act of such profound, calculated evil, walking out into the cool Austin night and just integrating back into society.
Right back into normal life.
They could have been standing behind you in line at the grocery store. They could have been driving next to you on the highway on your morning commute. And they have carried this horrific secret for decades without making a single fatal mistake that led the police to their door.
That invisible presence is the enduring terror of any unsolved case. It leaves an open loop in the community's psyche, a lingering sense of vulnerability. but it also dictates the current posture of the law enforcement agencies involved.
The APD.
Yes, the Austin Police Department has not relegated this to a dusty filing cabinet in a basement. They are actively managing the evidence, banking entirely on the exponential advancement of scientific technology to eventually cross paths with their suspect.
Right, because the official status of the case today remains unsolved, but we are in an era now where the science is doing things that sound like science fiction. Detectives are using tools to solve cases that are 40 or 50 years old.
The strategy now is essentially a waiting game with the evolution of science. They have the unknown male DNA profile safely preserved. Every single year, national and state DNA databases grow exponentially larger, and the analytical tools become more refined.
It's just a matter of time.
They are hoping that eventually, either the perpetrator's DNA will be entered into a system due to an arrest for another offense, or they will be able to utilize advanced techniques.
For anyone who might not be familiar with the cutting edge of forensic science, what kind of advanced techniques are they hoping to use?
There are two main avenues. First is advanced DNA phenotyping.
What does that do?
Think of phenotyping as a biological police sketch. We aren't just looking for a direct match in a computer system anymore. Scientists can look at the DNA itself and determine the killer's eye color, hair color, skin tone, and ancestral background to build a physical profile from scratch.
That's incredible.
It is. The second avenue is familial DNA tracing, also known as forensic genetic genealogy. This is like building a family tree in reverse.
Like the Golden State Killer case.
Exactly. If the killer's distant cousin takes a commercial DNA test to find out their heritage, investigators can find that partial match, build out the family tree, and follow the branches right down to the suspect. The physical evidence from the yogurt shop is secure. It is simply a matter of the technology catching up to the perpetrator's one biological mistake.
And as we summarize this incredibly heavy deep dive, that technological progress is the thread of hope we have to hold on to. But as we wait for science to catch the killers, we have to sit with the heartbreaking reality of what was irrevocably lost in 1991.
4 young lives.
4 lives: Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers. 4 girls with bright futures, loving families, and endless potential, cut down in a senseless, brutal act of violence while just trying to live their normal teenage lives.
It's an unimaginable loss.
We have to acknowledge the devastating lack of closure for their families, who have fought relentlessly for decades. They have endured botched investigations, the emotional whiplash of false hopes and overturned convictions, and the agonizing daily knowledge that the real killers are walking free. Their resilience is staggering, and their fight for justice continues every single day.
It is a profound legacy of endurance. The families of the victims, and indeed the broader community of Austin, refuse to let these 4 girls be forgotten. The case remains a stark, enduring reminder of the immense complexities of the justice system, the devastating generational impact of early investigative missteps, and the absolute necessity of scientific advancement in the pursuit of truth.
Before we wrap up, I want to address you directly and leave you with one final, lingering thought. A question to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We have spent this entire time analyzing the chillingly methodical nature of these killers. We talked about how they didn't panic.
The control they had.
Yes. If the real perpetrators were calm enough, organized enough, and ruthless enough to coordinate the execution of 4 innocent teenagers, deliberately stack their bodies, successfully deploy an arson strategy to burn a building to the ground, and evade a massive police dragnet for over 30 years without a single whisper of a confession.
It's a terrifying thought.
Is it really possible that the Austin yogurt shop was their only crime? When individuals possess that specific level of calculated violence and forensic awareness, they rarely act just once and retire. Could there be other unsolved cases out there, other mysterious structural fires, other localized tragedies bearing the hidden signature of these invisible killers, hiding in plain sight all these years?
It is a dark prospect, but from a criminological standpoint, it is a highly logical one. Criminal behavior of this magnitude and organization rarely exists in a vacuum. The skills, the coordination, and the profound psychological detachment required to execute the yogurt shop murders suggest a level of criminal sophistication that may very well have been practiced before that night in 1991, or repeated in the decades since.
It's a terrifying possibility, and it is exactly why the resolution of this case is so incredibly vital. Not just for honoring the memory of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy, but for the safety of everyone else. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We will see you next time.